In this episode, we're going to pull apart a story that made headlines in December about a Victorian family who lost their house deposit. How could they have avoided this tragedy?
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
How's this for a headline? Weird detail lets sellers keep Victorian families' $320,000 house deposit. It's enough to strike fear into the heart of every home buyer. What was this weird detail? Was it really that weird, or did they make an easily avoidable mistake? But before we get into that, we're going to have a little chat about Megan's special house.
This is those who watch.
For those who watch, yes, there's a video behind Megan. I'm not really sure whether in the edit you actually, with the way it's edited, you even get to see it. Hopefully you do. You just hear us banter on about it. This looks horrible, I have to say.
Well, this is in China, so you can see, high rise, all that sort of stuff. But what this is a suspected illegal structure that has been covered over with plantings. I don't know how they thought they were going to get away with it.
So anyone who's not listening, so what this is it just looks like an apartment building, not a particularly attractive one at that, and it looks like it's got a massive topiary tree growing on the top of it. But what you're saying
around it
is that inside that tree, which isn't a tree, is basically an illegal structure that they've planted and put a hanging garden around to try to pretend it's not there.
As if it stands out like a sore thumb because there is not another piece of greenery anywhere around.
No,
somebody doesn't really know how to be clandestine.
It's in a concrete. It's like I'm trying to think of those cartoons where somebody thinks they're in disguise and they're so obvious they just stick out like sore thumb.
Humans are funny things, funny creatures, aren't they?
Dear. Okay, let's talk about the big mistake.
Let's talk about this. Now, we're referring to an article that was published on news.com.au amongst other sites, and it even made its way to the UK. It's a very emotive story with the subheading, "A family with 3 young kids under the age of 12 thought they'd secured their $3.2 million dream home until one clause in the contract left them ruined." Ouch. Like that headline, when I read that headline, I thought, oh my God,
what's gone wrong?
What's gone wrong? Now, we've added the link to the show notes. And before we kick off, we want to make it known that we haven't fact-checked the article because it's the process we want to go through here rather than determine a remedy for them. So what was in the article, we're going with that being correct.
Also, the fact is most first home buyers are not spending $3.2 million on a property. So we get that you guys listening to this, we're thinking, my God, if you had that much money, what are you doing? Throwing it away. But anyways, let's start at the top. So this story starts in June 2019. And if anyone remembers way back to June 2019, do you remember what happened in May 2019, Megan?
Oh,
I've caught you out here, haven't I?
Because we're in the middle of COVID and we were all trying to keep our businesses afloat was what was happening.
No, that was the...
Oh, sorry. No, the year before.
You're a whole year out there.
A whole year out.
Everything's blurred. You know, May
was
2019.
That when Sydney came off the boil?
No, it was the federal election.
Oh, there you go.
That's when Scott Morrison won the unwinnable, or what should say, Shorten lost the unlosable election. And so, but the market in Sydney and Melbourne at that time was pretty bad. It started rebounding, you know, towards the end of 2019, but we had been in downturn for 2 years. Sydney and Melbourne have both been in downturn in 2 years. That's the reason I sort of highlight when was that, because this couple and the young with 3 small children under 12, love that in the headline, they purchased a house in Melbourne in June 2019 with a 6-month settlement. And that's a long settlement period time.
Anywhere.
Yes. So first of all, the very fact that you could get such a long settlement says to me that the owners were prepared to make concessions for a buyer, because in a hot market, you got Buckley's getting a 6-month settlement.
And look, it may have been that it suited the sellers to have a long settlement. They might have been building another property. There's all sorts of circumstances that we don't know about here. But True. I guess what it raises for us is, what are some of the risks of having a long settlement?
There definitely are some risks. One is, if you have a pre-approval, they tend to last 3 months. So if you've got a 6-month settlement, you're buying with an understanding of what you've got financed. I know we're jumping ahead here because these people, spoiler alert, didn't even have this. But anyway, if they did have a pre-settlement, that would pre-approval, that would last 3 months.
Only
and
3 months.
So there's a risk associated with taking a settlement that's longer than that.
Because lending rules can change. They change constantly. And if you haven't got an unconditional approval on a property, which a bank isn't going to do an unconditional approval on a 6-month settlement, they're going to still have conditions on that. And that is that the property value's up closer to settlement. So that long settlement, it affects your finance position.
Yeah, and they may well have asked for it too, because they did have another property, which is in Bendigo, and if the buyer asked for it, you know, and this is often the case with our clients, you know, sometimes I'll say, oh, look, I'd really want a 4-month settlement or something. And I'm like, well, even if we can get it, can you please check with your broker whether that's feasible, whether there's any risks associated with that? And so that's the very first thing. It's just, you got to have advisors so that you know the questions to ask, because, you know, we don't know what we don't know. And so that's one of the things that as a buyer's agent we do, is point our clients, okay, I can't advise you on the finance, but I tell you what, I do know that that's
ask
danger
these
zone.
Questions.
Yeah. So these guys signed a contract, okay? So that means they made an offer which had various conditions attached, and then they, you know, potentially, presumably, but there was nothing in the article about their offer. It just said that they signed a contract and they noticed that the subject to finance clause had been removed. Now, in New South Wales, for instance, there's no standard subject to finance clause anyway. So, even the very...
In Queensland, you have to insert the clause. So the clause is on the contract, but you actually have to enact the clause by putting in certain pieces of information. So it's not removed in that circumstance. But in Victoria...
And we probably could have fact-checked that one, to be honest, just prior to this. Now I'm thinking about it. However, but even if... I know you can buy there without having that clause in the contract. So I wouldn't suggest that it's a standard contract clause. And here's the thing. Every... it might be common, standard. But it might not be standard. And so this is where people get into trouble, when they assume that something should be standard, because for them it seems reasonable, but it's actually not the way things actually operate. And so, you know, signing without legal advice, because that's what it sounds like they've done, that's really scary. Like, what on earth makes somebody think that they don't need to get these things checked by an expert?
It's fine to go ahead in a risky situation like this, which is an unconditional contract in this set of circumstances, but do it with your eyes wide open and with the information. You know, spoiler alert again, part of the article referred to the fact that he had bought a property in Australia previously, and assumed that what had happened then would be the same as what would happen now, some years later. And things change, legislation changes, lending policies change, market conditions change, contracts change, even standard contracts change.
Yes, massive assumptions. So this is just assumption after assumption after assumption, and nowhere in this article does it refer to them ever getting advice. And so, I mean, that's just an easy thing. It's so avoidable, really. They could have asked a mortgage broker. They could have even
should have. Sorry, Veronica. Should have
gone and got the contract looked at by a lawyer, talked to a lawyer before signing such an important document, but didn't do either of those things. And the husband is quoted as saying, "We wanted the house, of course. We had got emotionally attached to the house. We liked it." He said,
"Oh, those emotions."
Yes. He also felt pressured into signing the contract with the revised condition because the real estate agent told him that there were other potential buyers waiting in the wings. And he said, I quote, "I was worried that they would sell the house." And he meant to somebody else. Now, oh my God, this is just 101 fail. And we do feel for these people.
Oh, and great respect to the buyers, but this is about the lessons that we can pass on, because clearly they were emotionally attached, made some assumptions about process, and didn't seek advice from experts in their fields, and relied on the agent
to guide them through the process.
Is working for the seller. Now, at no point do I see any issue with what the agent has done here. Their job is to sell the property for the highest price to any buyer on any terms that are favourable to the seller.
Absolutely. I mean, and here's the thing. The market, I'm telling you right now, I know the market was crap at the time. But these buyers have fallen so in love with the house, obviously, that they just to the exclusion of any caution, or, what were they doing? Did they not notice that probably the open house would not have had that many people go through it? I mean, obviously, FOMO can kick in, not just in hot markets. FOMO can kick in the absence of information that, good market information that would have given them, I guess, some insights that hopefully would have dissipated that FOMO. And as a consequence, they quite possibly overpaid. I mean, how did they possibly come up with, if they've done their other due diligence, right?
Yeah, where did they do their pricing research?
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty sure they didn't do the free mini course that's on Homebuyer Academy.
Fair assumption.
If they had, they would have probably heard about talking to a mortgage broker.
And I think our mini course did exist then too, so it was freely available for them. Now, but you know what the really interesting thing is? They were actually, that owner never actually sold it. So after they defaulted and weren't able to settle, the owner pocketed their deposit, right? So $320,000. Thank you very much for coming. The agent
minus the agent's commission, because the agents would have been paid their commission on that.
That's it. Agent got their fee out of that. And unfortunately for these buyers, I should say, that they've lost $320,000. Those owners didn't actually they still haven't sold the property.
So where were the other buyers that were waiting in the wing?
Yeah.
Now, we're not suggesting that you second guess an agent who is telling you this, but you need to understand where you are in the market cycle to see if it's feasible that there might be a lot of other buyers sitting in the wings. In a rapidly rising market, I wouldn't be second guessing when an agent says that. It's undoubtedly true.
Yes. And in fact, I think we need to do a negotiation episode where we can start talking about, those little things that agents say, But, and look, highly recommend.
Put it down, put it on the list.
Yes, we'll put that on our list. I think we'll do a mini course, a workshop. Oh, God, just do the course, people. There's all this sort of stuff in there. But anyway, so these guys, they failed to recognise the market. They failed to get advice. They failed to understand that the agent was working them. After the event, he basically, because they're obviously outgunned by the agent. And after the event, the hapless buyer said, the agents sell 10 houses a month and I only buy one every 10 years, and that's the truth.
That's the point.
Yes.
That is the point. You don't know what you don't know. And if you make false assumptions based on past history or what someone else tells you, then you're actually further back than you are forward. You're dealing with people who do this every day. This is their job. This is their expertise. This is their ability to get good money out of buyers is what they're actually paid to do. Yep. They're doing their job.
and they create urgency. So that's what this agent was doing. I don't necessarily agree that that's
maybe why you and I started businesses in buyers agency to balance that up and to give people representation that's equally professional. But one thing that he said was that they weren't planning on withdrawing. They had no intention of not going ahead with the purchase, but that's actually not the point of the finance clause.
No.
So let's see how he approached that.
Well, yeah, and this is a good point, actually, because he's like, but we weren't planning on withdrawing, so we didn't worry about the finance clause. So it's like the finance clause isn't about you withdrawing. It's about basically protecting the vendor to say, well, you've got no get out of jail clause. Like if you can't get finance, that's
too bad, so sad.
Yeah, because they didn't want the risk, particularly if you're going to sign with a 6-month settlement. Most owners wouldn't want to risk that. What could happen at the end of that 6 months is that you can't get your money and go, oh, so sad, too bad. It's a tough market for selling.
Yeah, and if the market was dropping during that period of time, they could have suffered a loss over a 6-month settlement, and then resale would have been at a lower cost. Now, the seller does have remedy. If the buyer defaults on the contract, they can actually sue them for the difference between what the original buyer would have paid and what they actually were able to achieve. So there is remedy, but that's long and protracted and could take a long time in court.
Maybe these guys were lucky that the vendor didn't sell, because if they'd sold for less than the 3.2 million, they might have sued them for the difference. So actually they might count their blessings.
Yeah.
Now, this is risky stuff.
So again, lessons out of this, not judgment. But in order to calculate whether he could get the finance on the $3.2 million purchase minus his $320,000 deposit plus his purchasing costs, in order to calculate it, he used an online calculator and assumed that he'd be eligible for the same type of loan that he'd used to buy his first property, which I think from memory was
in Bendigo.
Medical specialist. And
he had a house in Bendigo.
Yeah, he had a house in Bendigo that he'd purchased about 10 years earlier, but he, being medical, they can access different LVRs, so higher LVR as a medical professional, up to 90%, I think. And but that house that he purchased was at a lower price point. So herein lies why you talk to a mortgage broker before you step out the door and start inspecting, before you get on realestate.com, you build your team, your support crew. Step one of the 10 steps in the P.A.C.E system is build your support crew. And that is understand your borrowing capacity, not from an online calculator, because the online calculator can't tell you the terms and conditions of what you can and can't access.
When I read that bit, I was like, this guy, almost deserves what he got. I mean, no one deserves to lose $320,000. But, I mean, this is just, I don't know whether it was arrogance, willful ignorance, or just true ignorance. But the guy's obviously, and I say the guy, it's a couple, right? They're not dumb. They're smart people. They're doctors, people. Right? They're not dumb. But if doctors can make this mistake, and quite often doctors do make a lot of mistakes outside medical because they are, they're so smart,
and everyone in their field.
Yeah, everyone looks after them, and nobody thinks they could do any wrong. But anyway, they, after they sign the contract, and this is the danger, right? Then you find out the rules. After you've committed yourself, then you find out the truth. It's just better to find this stuff out before you sign away your life. Like, let's get it in the right order. This is why the P.A.C.E system is so important. You've got 10 big chunky steps to get through, and you've got to get it in the right order. Or you stuff up like this. Like he's gone straight to step 9?
Mate, the negotiation.
He never got to step 10 because step 10 is settlement, right?
He got to step 9 all the way to negotiation or auction.
He skipped step 1. He'd done step 2. He'd saved his deposit. He skipped step 3, the plan. He went straight to 4. He did step 4, which was search and inspect, right?
Completely ignored 5.
He skipped revise and correct, which is 5. He skipped the methods of sales, understanding what was going on.
Contracts and offers and who to talk to and when to get advice.
Number 7. Skip that, the evaluation, totally. Skip number 8, the contract. He basically did number one. No, he didn't do number one. What did he do? Number two, number 4, and number 9 out of a 10-step process. No wonder
But he didn't even do all of number 2, Veronica, because number 2 is getting your finance pre-approved.
Oh,
he just saved the deposit.
A bit of step 2.
It absolutely breaks my heart. And the whole reason that we actually put this course together was because we were hearing from people that were doing, they were often going from step 4, which is search and inspect, through to step 9, which is negotiate or go to the auction, and then going, I didn't know I needed to do that. I didn't know I needed to talk to a broker. I didn't know there were no finance approval clause on an auction contract. I didn't know. I remember a student saying to us in the beta course that didn't he work out that he'd done like 4, 7, 9, like I think he worked out he was just zigzagging all over the place.
I think a lot of the students, and this is where revise and correct. So step 5 in our 10-step process is revise and correct. We just need to pause sometimes. The consequences of getting it wrong are huge. And so just don't rush. Speed is the essence, obviously, in a rising market. We're not saying just slow down at a snail's pace and don't do anything. But what we are saying is it does not pay to rush through this process, because the consequences, particularly for this couple and their family, they're dire. They're really, really awful. Now,
well, I think if you are prepared properly, then you can move with speed
and
with confidence.
And
that's
knowledge.
The difference. So you can still move quickly in a rapidly rising market if you have prepared yourself thoroughly.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Very true. Now, so what he discovered, of course, was that instead of the bank lending him 90%, which he had previously experienced, they'd only lend him 85%, which meant that he had a shortfall of $160,000 plus stamp duty, which is basically the same amount of money. So there's another $320,000 that he was missing. Now, there's no mention in the article as to whether he had anticipated stamp duty. The sort of inference was that he hadn't. So there's another thing, back to money, isn't it? Understanding what your costs are.
What your costs are, which is part of the money. Step 2.
How much do you need?
How much do you need, including all of your outgoings?
He didn't do step 2 at all, did he really? Other than saving, he did nothing.
No, he saved the deposit.
I keep saying he. They.
Case study saved the deposit. Yeah.
They
and that can be sizable, on $3.2 million, as you say. It's about 160K in Sydney? New South Wales? Victoria, sorry.
It sort of depends. It's more complicated in Sydney, over $3 million. There's an extra kicker. But actually, I think Victoria has the most expensive stamp duty in the whole country,
yeah, it does actually.
I do believe.
Let's pick some of those examples. Yeah.
You guys sort of remember, they had this house in Bendigo, and he also had a share in a business. And so obviously, as the deadline started looming, they have got into a mad panic to try to rectify the situation. And they've tried to sell their Bendigo home, but they couldn't get a deal done in time. And, once again, we're still talking 2019 market. Sydney and Melbourne were starting to recover. I don't know what was going down in Bendigo, but certainly the market conditions at the time weren't in their favour. They bought assuming the market was hot where it wasn't. Then they found out that the cold, hard truth of trying to sell in a tough market.
A regional market where there's not a lot of demand at that time. Yep.
Yeah. And also we don't know what it was he owned. I did try to find out, actually. I did try to see if I could get a sense of what he bought, whether what he bought in Bendigo, what they'd bought in Bendigo was the sort of property that would be difficult to sell or not, because sometimes the market as a whole can really contract and it becomes difficult to sell everything. But there are always properties that will sell faster than others.
Yep. Yeah, and if you've got A-grade properties, highly sought after, characteristics that are appropriate for the area, scarcity, owner-occupier appeal, all those basics of A-grade properties, even in a slow market, are going to sell better and quicker and for a better price than if it's a compromised property.
Very true. And that would have been a lifeline for them, if they had got themselves whatever it was that they own in Bendigo, if that was an absolute cracker A-grade property that was always going to be in demand, that that can solve many problems, having that type of property that you need to sell.
But when you've got a time limit on you, it can, it can the pressure is enormous when you're forced to sell within a period of time in order to achieve an outcome. And if you can't achieve it, then it's almost like things start piling on top. And, if we only sell for that price, then we've still got this gap over here, and how are we going to plug the gap, and where are we going to get extra funds from? And I think from memory, he did approach family. They looked at all sorts of different options to fill that gap between what they'd expected to get in terms of finance. Now, they were absolutely fine to get finance. There was no issue with them obtaining finance. It was the loan to value ratio that they had misunderstood that would apply to them in their circumstances and in the price range that they were purchasing at. So no issues whatsoever with their assessment or capacity. It was just how much deposit.
How much?
Yeah.
And it also begs the question, and it all sounds a bit neat in the article, so it may not have been like this, but, if they'd saved $320,000, if they figured that $3.2 million was their budget, and I've seen buyers do this, that they then offer what their budget is, not necessarily what the house is worth, so particularly, and they were out of area buyers as well. They were not local to Melbourne. They actually, they're from overseas in the first place. They've been in Australia 10 years. So then they would have had to spend that time acclimatising themselves and familiarising themselves with the local property market. And then they've been living in a regional town, and then they're moving to a city. So they've got these quite different market conditions to wrap their head around. And these markets behave differently as well.
Absolutely. So, it's absolutely tragic, but it illustrates the risks of not knowing what you don't know and getting things in the wrong order.
Yeah,
Veronica.
And skipping steps,
not even knowing what steps to do that you've skipped. And that's the thing. I mean, it's just the basics of doing things in the right order at the right time are so important in the property purchasing process.
And that's really the message of this story. And unfortunately, of course, the news outlets that publish it, that all they want to do is say, oh, well, isn't that terrible? These people lost their money. It's
this contract error. Now, what was it? What was the headline? I need to go back to it. What was the headline? It was
weird clause.
Weird detail.
There's nothing weird about it. Just like
not weird.
No. Just that you didn't know what you didn't know. And when you notice this inverted commas weird detail, they didn't do anything about it. They didn't seek any advice. They just went ahead.
So they're aware of it.
And so look,
you do need to get advice.
Hugely avoidable. But if it doesn't do anything else, it illustrates, as you said, the gaps that people don't know. If you don't know what you don't know, this is the danger zone. So all I can say is that people, if you are first home buyers, even if you're not first home buyers, do the bloody course. Go and do.
Save yourself a loss.
$749 for God's sake, versus $320,000 lost.
But even if the potential loss is,
20 grand,
20,000, 40,000, 50,000, even if the loss is that amount, there's other remedies that the seller can chase you for if you default on a contract. If you've done things wrong and you can't settle on a property, they've got a whole raft of other remedies that they can use against you, and you might be way more out of pocket than just the loss of your deposit.
So that's very, very sobering news for a lot of buyers, and you got to remember that really, caveat emptor means buyer beware. And in varying degrees across every single state and jurisdiction, you've got different things. We've often talked about it in Queensland. The vendor is bound to disclose almost nothing. In New South Wales, in Victoria and New South Wales, you get disclosed a fair amount, but still not enough. It is not enough. So you need to know the gaps, because the law assumes that you are in a position to be able to make good decisions for yourself. Yep. And let's face it.
And that you're going to seek advice. Every contract says we recommend, in essence, you get advice. You seek advice.
Yeah. And we do too.
Yeah. And we most certainly do. So do the course. Then you'll know what you don't know. In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first-time buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.